Good evening. I'm Henry Neufeld, owner of Energion Publications, and also, as I don't advertise all that often because we're an interdenominational publisher, I'm a member of a United Methodist congregation. And United Methodist congregations right now have some interesting things to look at as the United Methodist Church moves forward. So this interview will be particularly about issues of interest to United Methodists, and secondarily, though, to others, as more than one church has or may go through some of these issues. I'm speaking with Allan Bevere. Allan is author of several books, including our participatory study guide to Colossians and The Politics of Witness, in which he deals with the church being able to speak the truth to power, which often we can't. So, Allan, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here. Good to be with you.
And also, I should mention that you're a pastor in the East Ohio Conference of the United Methodist Church.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, let's just get started. I mean, for most United Methodists are aware that there's a special called General Conference in 2019. Those who aren't United Methodists, and as a matter of fact, in my experience, some United Methodists may not be aware of exactly what is the issue or what are the issues going before this conference, which is theoretically limited to a single issue, but that may be one of the difficulties. Could you just kind of outline what's going on here?
Yeah, well, in February of 2019, there's going to be a special general conference. I think it's 3 days, maybe 4 at the most, which is going to be dealing with basically one issue, focused on one issue, although larger issues surround this, and I agree with you on that, Henry. It's the issue basically of homosexual practice, whether or not to allow for the marriage of same-sex marriage within the denomination, allowing pastors to officiate and churches to host, and then also, of course, the question of ordaining practicing homosexuals, which means the persons who are gay but who are in a married covenant relationship. And that's really the focus of the General Conference.
Okay, so the direction would include changing the specific wording of the United Methodist discipline. At least some are advocating a change in that. And the particular variety is, you know, how would we structure? Will there be a single interpretation as in current practice? Or I guess it's a sort of division of the church based on practice, either of which, of course, would involve altering the church's current stand. Am I correct on that?
Well, there are basically there are 3 plans that are coming before the General Conference, as I understand it. The first plan, the one that's gotten the most publicity, is the one that has been recommended by a majority of the Council of Bishops, not unanimous, but by a majority of the Council of Bishops, called the One Church Plan, in which, if passed, our position would become on the issue of homosexuality and gay marriage is that we are not of one mind. And therefore, we are going to leave that issue up to local churches, local pastors, annual conferences, so that then every pastor gets to decide whether he or she can perform a gay marriage. Every church will have to decide whether they can host boards of ordained ministry, as I understand it. I think at the annual conference level, we're, I guess, instructed by the annual conference on whether or not they were ordained practicing homosexuals in a covenant relationship, so in a marriage relationship. So basically, what we're saying is we're not of one mind, so we're going to just leave it up to individuals to determine what it is they're able to do and not to. That's the main plan. There is a traditionalist plan which not only reinforces the current discipline, in which we say, while all persons are of sacred worth and created in the image of God, we believe that homosexual practice is not in keeping with the teaching of the New Testament. That's the current position. The traditionalist plan would reinforce that and also then allow for those who dissent to exit and be able to take their buildings and credentials and everything with them, all of that stuff that whatever would be involved. There's another plan called the connectionalist plan, which would call for drawing up of as I understand it, annual conferences and jurisdictions within jurisdictions and annual conferences. Some would be traditional, some would be progressive, but we would still be one church. That plan has not gotten a lot of attention. I think that plan has no chance of passing simply because it's really convoluted and complicated. But those are the three plans before the General Conference.
It'd be an interesting question then, because I agree that third plan that you mentioned is extremely complicated, and I wasn't quite able to follow the details of it. But essentially, it would say being in one denomination, but essentially rather than having individual congregations decide, it would be congregations decide and then becoming part of sort of conferences and jurisdictions.
Yeah.
According to their decision.
Yeah, and it would be just really interesting to see a map drawn up of that once it's all done, right?
The question would be how, an interesting question would be how such a church would function. It would sound to me a great deal like dividing into two denominations, but not admitting it.
Yeah, and basically what would keep us together, to be honest, would be our pension plan. You know, basically that's what would keep us together. That would be our one common connection, is we'd have a common pension. So yeah, I would be, I'm not one to predict what happens at general conferences, but I would be absolutely floored if that plan passed. I just don't think it has a chance. I haven't talked to too many people. Actually, I don't think I've talked to anyone on both sides of this issue who are enamored with that plan.
Okay, so that would also, of course, either that plan or the plan recommended by the Council of Bishops would end up with certain ministry issues, I would assume, then, such as how do you know when you're going to a United Methodist Church what is affirmed and what is not?
Right. So I'm assuming that'd be part of the consultation process. So if you had a pastor who basically was, believed it was important to be able to perform same-sex weddings, and if it was time for them to move, I think that would be one of the things that would be part of the cabinet's consideration, of not to send him or her to a church that says we don't want to have same-sex marriages on our property, for example, and vice versa. So I'm assuming that the consultation process would take care of that.
The consultation process would take care of that, I would imagine, on the side of pastors, although I can imagine some fairly interesting situations that could result. But I think I'm asking from the point of view of the layperson. Let's take, if I'm telling somebody who is gay, who says to me, what church should I attend? I'm likely to suggest a United Church of Christ congregation, because that's the position of the United Church of Christ.
Right.
Whereas a United Methodist congregation, you have some uncertainty going on under the plan recommended by the Council of Bishops, and I guess was that also the decision of the Way Forward Commission?
Yeah, the Way Forward Commission. That was the result of the Way Forward Commission. Okay. The one church plan came out of that. Not everybody from the Way Forward Commission, and not every bishop, it was in agreement with the one church plan.
Yeah. If you, what I'm thinking about from the layperson's point of view, though, is if you're recommending a congregation to somebody, to say this would be a congregation that you could join, and let's say either it's a married gay couple, or on the other hand, somebody who firmly believes that that this is unacceptable. They don't know, looking at the sign of the United Methodist Church, whether this is likely to be a welcoming place or not.
Yeah,
for either one.
Yeah. So you could have two Methodist churches in one town. One up the street performs gay marriages. One down the street does not. And you know, if you're looking for one or the other, you've got to be discerning and know, you know, which is which. The other issue that's going to happen, obviously, is if the one church plan were to pass, then every congregation is going to have this discussion about what do they do. So you're going to have congregations too that will probably be divided. You know, there'll be some that won't. There are very, very traditional churches that will have a minority of more progressive people who might leave, and vice versa. But you're going to also have churches that are going to be really divided over this issue, and they're going to have to make a decision. So so at least in the short term, it seems to me that you're going to have some shuffling of the membership, shuffling of the pews from one place to another, or you could even have people leave the Methodist Church either because they're traditional and they don't like even opening the door to this, or they're progressive on this and they don't like being in a denomination where we still allow people to say no to gay marriage. So you may have people who just simply leave.
Yeah. I enter this just as the background for the way that I ask the questions, on the assumption that people on both sides are of firm, genuine convictions and aiming to follow Christ, whether, you know, whatever we agree with. And thus you're going to have people who sincerely cannot accept one thing or another. I guess, would you agree? I'm thinking that we're unlikely to be changing anybody's position on homosexuality in general at this conference.
No. I've not been a big participant in this discussion now for about 4 or 5 years. And part of the reason is because, one, for the most part, people's minds are set. There are people who are certainly trying to figure it out, but you know, and then after a while, you know, there's no new arguments. The arguments are the same on both sides. Actually, what's happened is we've been arguing for so long that there are people now who are, and I won't mention any names, but there are public bloggers who are trying to come up with new arguments that twist logic to the extreme. And to be honest, I get a headache from reading it. There's just not really any new arguments to be made. And the other reason why I have not been a part of it is because I agree with your comment. I think there are people on both sides of this issue who are trying faithfully to follow the gospel. I don't think that my friends who are traditionalists are not homophobes. My friends who are progressives on this issue are not in favor of immoral licentiousness. But the argument has gotten so personal, and I have good friends on both sides of this argument who publicly had their character questioned just because of their position. And I refuse to be part of that conversation. I'm just not going to do it.
I think that's what probably concerns me the most in this, is not primarily the issue itself, but the way we behave about this or any other issue. That it seems to me that, you know, I've observed the same thing, and that very often we are, I would say that no matter how much we disagree, we should be gracious in disagreeing, and I see very little grace going on right now.
Yeah, it's real easy to be gracious with those who agree with you, I suppose. Graciousness over difficult issues like this, or passionate issues like this, can be difficult. And I just think in general, I agree with you. I don't think it's just this issue. I think it's a lot of issues. How do we disagree and be passionate? As I've said before, it's possible to be civil and yet be passionate and hold your views. How are we civil and passionate at the same time? You know, with our colleagues who we are in ministry with. But the discussion here has just gotten harder and harder. And I don't even think there's a discussion taking place. I think it's a sounding board. I think we just are in our own echo chambers. I think we are talking to each other, but we're talking. I don't know that we're really listening.
Okay. I want to bring up a couple of things having to do with the voting and the representation of the church. So that's just kind of a warning ahead of time. But I first want to go to the issue of exit. The United Methodist Church is a denomination where the properties are held in a centralized way. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking that the annual conferences have the title to the church properties. And you mentioned the pensions issue, which of course brings up how much of this discussion has to do with money as opposed to the convictions on the particular issues. Money seems to get into everything. And we've seen this kind of debate with the Episcopal Church, as we have, groups claiming the name of Christ are in court arguing over church properties, largely church properties without a lot of people involved. So is there any proposal, any option being held out here to graciously handle church property for those congregations that sit down at the end and say, we can't be part of whatever is voted here. It just doesn't work for us.
The traditionalist plan, if passed, does allow for that. I do not know what all the details are and the fine points of that, but I know that there in the plan allows for what is, I think, referred to in the plan as a gracious exit, in which property can be kept and those kinds of things. And the reality is, I think there's two issues as to why this debate in United Methodism has gone on for so long, as opposed to other mainline Protestant churches in America anyway, who have settled it in one form or another, are the two issues that we're a global church, that our general conference, that we have delegates from Africa, Europe, the Philippines, and so we are a global church. So we don't really just take care of our own business here on the continent of the United States. In North America, we have that. And the second thing is that the property of each United Methodist Church is held in trust by the conference trustees. So if you decide as a congregation we're leaving the church, we're leaving the denomination, the congregation certainly is free to do that, but they must leave the assets. So that has been one thing that has kept us together, whereas I think that had a church been able to take its building and property, that we would have seen a lot more congregations, probably on both sides of this argument, having left by now. But so there's no doubt that the money is part of the issue, and it's probably what's kept us here. I don't want to say that it's only money that motivates people in this. I think there are sincere people on both sides of this that have genuine concerns about their perspective on mission and ministry and the ministry of the gospel. But there's no doubt that it's been the money that has kind of kept this thing going to the place where we now are.
I think the unfortunate part there, and you're probably right, and I appreciate kind of the correction there, that it's not that money is the primary issue, it's that we subordinate other issues as we debate.
Right.
And money tends to distort, I think.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I don't know how you get around it. It's there. It's always part of it. But at the same time, how do we keep from making it more than it ought to be?
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of, we are a global church. And if I can just bring by analogy, I grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I keep my eye on it. And right now they're having a debate over ordination of women. Mm-hmm. And some of the, in the United Methodist Church, the ordination of women would be considered largely a settled thing. For them, it is not, and they have some very similar issues. The global church, the European, North American, and really to some extent Australia, New Zealand, are largely in favor of ordaining women on the same basis as men, and many of the church members from the rest of the world are not. And you end up with some of the same money issues, the property held in trust, and so on. And so this is again a case, I think, where the primary issue ends up distorting others, such as well, let's just be blunt about it, is a believer in Africa, Asia, South America, of the same value in terms of administering the church as a believer in North America.
Yeah. Well, as one who has a great love for the global South and our sisters and brothers there, having worked in Latin America a year and a half ago, I went to Zimbabwe, to Africa University, one of our Methodist schools there. And just seeing the conditions that the church is doing ministry in, I have great respect for our sisters and brothers. And I do think that there are times, and it needs to be said, that I think sometimes some of my colleagues here in the United States who get a little frustrated because particularly our African sisters and brothers take positions they don't like, that they either make disparaging comments about the fact that we're the cash cow for them in a sense, and they ought to think twice before they tell us what we can do. And the other thing sometimes that happens is that I've heard some comments that I think are very paternalistic. These folks have positions that they just need to get into the 20th century. We even had a bishop 4 years ago or 3 years ago say our African sisters and brothers need to grow up. And so one of the great ironies for me is that sometimes our colleagues here in the United States who are so concerned the most about colonial attitudes, patriarchal attitudes, and paternalizing attitudes express them themselves toward particularly those in Africa. And some of the churches and bishops there are doing ministry in some very difficult circumstances you and I can only horrifyingly think about. And they're doing wonderful ministry. And so in the midst of this, the one thing that I hope is that in our attitudes, all of us would make sure that we realize we're all equal. We're all doing the ministry of the church. We're all a global church. And this is not a matter, this debate, this discussion that we're having is not a matter of who is more spiritually mature and who is more grown up in the world. I don't think that's the case at all. So I agree. And by the way, I would just say for the record, I love being a global church. One of the reasons why I'm a United Methodist, I love the global church. I love the fact that we all have a say in each other's business. I think that's important. I don't want to see that be lost. Even if, by the way, sometimes those global decisions go against what I want.
Part of being a global church is that you probably will disagree and you probably will lose from time to time on some of your favored ideas.
Yes, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. It's called the mind of the church. And it's been a long history of that. There's the individual mind, the individual conscience, but then there's the mind of the church. And there are some places in our own discipline where I don't agree. But I understand that our General Conference has spoken. That's the mind of the church, of the United Methodist Church. And so since the Book of Discipline speaks, is the only the General Conference speaks for our denomination. When people ask me what our position is on this, that, or the other, I don't tell them what my position is. I say, here's the position, and if they want to know what my position is, I will tell them, and I'll say, but it's different. It's different from our denomination, but understand this is the position that the General Conference has taken. And by the way, as a pastor, I need to uphold that, as long as it is the position.
Yeah. Well, would you have any recommendations for people in local churches between now and General Conference as to what we should be thinking about, what we should be doing, because as this approaches?
Well, I think this is going to. I've thought about this. I think this is going to have a different impact in different churches. I think that there are churches in our denomination where this really is a front and center issue on both sides. And I think there are congregations where it's really just not. It's there, but it's not really centrally on the radar. And so I think the decision of the General Conference is going to affect different churches and even different pastors in different ways. So, I mean, I hope there's been some discussions going on in conversation. I guess one thing I would say is something that I always say, and I say it, Henry, you know, when you've talked to me about politics, that something that I always say is to the church is be the church, you know, be the people of Jesus. Continue to spread the gospel, the good news in word and in deed. That God has extended this message to all people and offered salvation to all people. And get into your local communities and just be the church in season and out of season, whatever's going on. I guess that's about the only thing I would say.
Okay, I've been talking with Dr. Allan Bevere. He's a pastor in the East Ohio Conference and one of our Energion authors. Allan, I appreciate your taking the time, and hopefully we will continue to be the church both before and after the conference. Be
Yes.
the church in the world.
Well, maybe after the conference, you and I can have a conversation afterwards and look back and see how far off we might have been.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Thanks.